first presenter today is Carly Walker. Carly's a behaviour therapist with SISCA, and her presentation is titled Integration of Evidence-Based Therapy Practice into Mainstream Education, Skills and Attributes of an Effective ABA Therapist.
My name is Carly Walker and I am lead therapist at SISCA. I work at a program called the IDEA program, which is the inclusion program at Movement Park Primary School, which is a school in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. And my topic today is integration of evidence-based therapy practice into mainstream education, skills and attributes of an effective ABA classroom therapist. And there's a couple of reasons why I think that this topic is really important for us to be starting to think about and talk about. The first is because, as we've been talking about this morning, is the general expansion of ABA into teaching children with autism. We've seen it be really successful in teaching young kids in early intervention-based settings like home programs and centre-based therapy settings, and now what we're seeing is a move into schools as well. And anecdotally, the demand is coming from parents and schools and teachers alike, and so we're having to fix this demand and put more therapists into schools. So the second reason follows on from this, and that is because of this switch between one-to-one and in a classroom. While the therapy practice is underpinned by ABA principles, and while a lot of the things might be the same, because of the different environment, a lot of things are actually going to be really different as well. So what I'd like to take a look at is what things are different in the one-to-one setting to the school classroom, and then we'll discuss the things that are the same. So of course in one-to-one the therapist is the primary instructor. The curriculum is set and managed by the behaviour consultant, or what some of you guys might call the program supervisor. The therapist designs the delivery of content and the session activities, which many of you will be familiar with. Therapist takes data for all goals, of course, because everything we do is evidence-based and we need to be able to track it. The therapist runs all behaviour intervention plans if necessary throughout their own session. The therapist delivers reinforcement system throughout the session as well. So let's look at the classroom now. So there's a real switch here. The therapist is no longer the primary instructor. It's the teacher now. So lots of things are different. The curriculum and behaviour goals are set and managed by the teacher and the consultant. So these are done in conjunction as a team. The therapist supports the delivery of the content, and the therapist structures learning opportunities in the natural environment. We're going to go over all of these in more detail really soon. The therapist takes the data to monitor progress for behaviour, and usually some academic goals, but some might also be tested by educational testing as well. And the therapist is involved with the behaviour intervention plan to some extent in the classroom, although this is child dependent and classroom dependent. And the therapist may deliver, or should deliver, reinforcement, which might be individualised or class-based. So let's look at the similarities. The therapy practice is underpinned by ABA principles and is evidence-based, which we all know, and I don't have to convince any of you of why we do what we do. The behaviour intervention plans are informed by data. And our overall goal is to increase the client's independence within tasks and generalise those skills that we learn. So now we'll look at what I just discussed about the school classroom, and so what it is that's different about it and what is the therapist's role within that. So when the teacher is the primary instructor, it might seem a little bit weird, especially from those of you who come from one-to-one, and I came from one-to-one as well, and for a number of years I worked across our Little Learners program, which is one-to-one intervention, and our school program. So it can be really tricky realising what your role is when you go into a classroom. So we need to remember, first of all, that the teacher is a primary instructor. So we need to make sure that our child understands this as well. And the ways that we can do this is by reinforcing compliance with the teacher's instructions. So whenever the teacher gives an instruction in the classroom, we need to be making sure that our student is following that instruction and that we're reinforcing it as well. Another thing that we can do is any questions that might crop up during the sessions that we're working with our students, if they're unsure of what they're supposed to be doing, we would redirect those questions to the teacher. If we're not in there, what's the student going to do? We need to be teaching them to go to the teacher first. We always need to remember to follow what the class is doing. So of course some children might be in a class with different levels of support at different times, but if you're in the classroom, you should be doing what the class is doing. If everybody's sitting on the mat, you're sitting on the mat too. If they're going to the library, so are you guys. The next point is that the curriculum is set and managed by the teaching team. So the teaching team could be the consultant, it's always the teacher, and might also be the grade level teachers as well. So what does that mean our role is? I'll talk about the goal-oriented bit first. So for each child or student and each lesson, there are going to be goals that are set by the teacher for what they want to get out of that lesson and what they want to teach their student. So this will be covered in things like the ILP, also in the lesson plans for the day. So we need to make it our job to find out what those goals are so that we can best support our student in the moment. And what goes hand in hand in this is communication. So this could be pre-class, post-class, and in the moment. So pre-class means going to class before the student gets there and speaking to the teacher about what the goal is. We need to make sure that if they're doing a writing task, we know that the goal is working within the thirds lines as opposed to recall. We need to know what we're prompting. Post-class, we can follow up with the teacher to show them this is what the student did well, this didn't go as well, what strategies can we use next time to make it go better? And in the moment as well. So I know some teachers like to have little communication systems with their therapists, like little points or little gestures within the classroom to help know when their student needs to be answering a question or focusing on something different. So the next one is that the therapist supports the delivery of content. So this is where our role comes in. We might not be the primary instructor, but we still do have a role in delivering some content. So we can pre-teach any skills that might be difficult for a student. So this goes along with going to class early and making sure that we know what the goals are. If it's something that we might need to preload, we can pull the student out for 5 minutes. Always remember to communicate with your teacher about it and pre-teach this. So that means that when your student goes in, they're feeling really confident about the goal. It means that they're going to understand more what's happening, and it just allows for a little bit more extra confidence in your child. We can consolidate after a lesson as well. This also helps us to see where your student's at. So it helps you answer the question after the lesson, what did my student learn? Did we meet the goals that we wanted to learn? If not, how can we change it? And generalisation as well. So a concept is no good to a student if he doesn't know how to generalise it. So we need to make sure that we're actually checking this as well. I'll come to prompting and prompt feeding soon. Data collection and reflection is so important. We sometimes take data for academic things. It really depends on the student and the team. But we always take it for behaviour, which I'll talk about soon. So we use data collection to help communicate within the team and also to the program supervisor or the consultant and the teacher as well. So it helps, say if you're a therapist who's working with a student Monday, Tuesday, and then there's a different therapist Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So it helps you communicate with the team about this is where they're at with this goal and this is where we want to move it to, this is how he's going, please prompt like this, things like that. Be elastic for different needs in different situations. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the term being elastic in the classroom, but it's one that we use a lot. And it basically means you need to be like a rubber band to your students. So your students that where the rubber band starts and you're where the rubber band finishes, and you need to come in and out depending on what their needs are for specific goals within the classroom. How many of you did pick up on the prompt she used at the start, which was have a look at what everybody else is doing? Did anybody pick up on that? It was a really nice prompt because she's actually teaching him the skill that he needs to figure out what to do if she's not there. So it doesn't help him if she says to him, oh look, go and pick a book up, because that's not teaching him the skill. She's saying, go and have a look at what everybody else is doing, and that's how you would be able to figure out what to do next. The next thing that she did was a nice series of little prompts. She waited for him to be independent, and we know that the student is at a level that we can give him a moment, we could give him a moment, and we would wait for him to be independent, and if not, then we would elasticate ourselves back in. And then she did that a few times with conditioned reinforcer, and then she pointed to the stars, which was a system that we were using for independence at that point in time. And she came back in, I think, about 3 or 4 times just to check that he was on the right track. And there was one prompt that she used when he sat down with the book and he had the book open, but he wasn't looking, and she just gave him a really nice little prompt. So when you're thinking about prompts, think about what can we prompt to make the child more independent, especially if we're not there, and also what's going to be the least intrusive in the classroom as well. Behaviour goals and BAPs are set and managed by the teacher and program supervisor or behaviour consultant. So what's our role? We refer to them as behaviour intervention plans. I'm not sure if you guys do across different organisations, but that basically means is we flag a behaviour and we take data to assess what the function might be, and the program supervisor or behaviour consultant comes up with a plan for how we would deal with that in a classroom. And so any child might have a number of BIPs for different behaviours, but as the therapist working with that student, it's your job to know that BIP back to front and know exactly how to implement it, know what the behaviour looks like and when to do it in the classroom. A really important note on that as well is when you're taking behaviour data, understand what it's being used for and know how to do it really well. We often use ABC data, which is a descriptive form of data, which is antecedent behaviour consequence. So we would look at what the setting was, what the behaviour looked like, and then what the consequence was to the student. And this is actually used not only to log behaviour before we put in a BIP, but also afterwards to see if our intervention has been useful and meeting the goal that we wanted to put in with. So the communication with the team aspect is also really important. So for children that might have behaviour during the week, and again you might have different therapists working across the week, just having that resource for another therapist to look back over and see what strategies worked and what didn't work and what behaviours might have come up, if there were any new antecedents, things like that. So the therapist is involved with behaviour management. And this can be so tricky, let's acknowledge that. It can be really tricky to manage behaviour in the classroom. But what we need to do is always refer first to the BIP, because this has been put in place for a reason. It's evidence-based, it's data-based, and the program supervisor or behaviour consultant has done it for a reason. We need to communicate to the teacher who's taking what part of the BIP. So it might be set up in a certain way that she takes some part and you take another part, but you always need to be communicating with each other about that. And also being able to recognise potential antecedents ahead of time. So knowing that you might be going to a different classroom and that upsetting schedule might be difficult for your student, being able to prime them for this, being able to set up maybe a visual schedule to show them what's going to happen. The reinforcement system, and this is really what sets us apart because we know how to use reinforcement and we know how to use it well. And the whole point of reinforcement is to increase the future frequency of a behaviour. So we can't forget about it because in an environment where we're trying to increase all these new skills, we really need to remember to be reinforcing them when they crop up. So follow the reinforcement plan as well. It's not just about colouring in tokens on a token board. There's a set plan for every child and we need to make sure that we stringently follow it. And think about ways that you can integrate it into the classroom as well. So taking peers out and structuring up social opportunities for that child, if that's what's reinforcing for them, or asking your student to take their token board to the teacher and say, hey, I'm finished, can I go? Ways that you can make it really natural to be integrated into the classroom. So the last point is structure learning opportunities around the natural environment. And this is what's really important in a classroom because we are not in control of that environment. It's not like in one-to-one where you structure everything up. So we need to be on our game to make sure that we can take all the opportunities that we can for our student to be generalising their learning naturally. So we can use the peers as models, we can use vicarious reinforcement, and teachers use this a lot where they probably don't even realise, hey, you're doing a great job sitting on the mat, well done, you get a star. Use natural reinforcers wherever you can. So this might be using peers or reading a book within the class, whatever works for your student in the environment so that we're not being too disruptive. So this really brings me to my conclusion. Our role in the classroom is to do this, is to structure as many opportunities as we can within the environment while taking into consideration all of the goals, the way we can communicate with the teacher. We need to know our BIP really well. And once we get all these skills under it, we're on our way to becoming a really effective therapist. So how do we know we're being effective? Because we know it because of data. We take it for a reason. We can guide our success by this. And when we see the independence and increased success in a student over time, this means that what we're doing is working well. So work yourself out of a job. Do it really effectively. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but it's a good motto to stand by. Thanks, guys. And we have 5 minutes for questions as well. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I work across the home and school setting, and the classroom I'm in at the moment, I was just wondering if you had any strategies. I really struggle with the collaboration part. There's a lot of them and us sort of attitude, and I find when I want to do prompting, even though we've got like our behaviour intervention plans and that, just giving documents and having the discussions isn't necessarily enough. It's sort of like no, let them do it themselves, and the understanding of, well, we're working towards independence isn't necessarily there, and I get the feeling that it's a little bit about like we know what we're doing, and I'm just not sure the best way to sort of, I guess, smooth that relationship over and make them feel a bit less threatened when I'm in their classroom.
Yeah, for sure. And I gotta say, I'm really lucky that I work within a school that I don't come up against that, because we're in a program that we have been in there for a little while. But I can totally see where you're coming from. My advice would be to make yourself indispensable to that classroom. You could be a help to the teacher when your student's being independent, so that she can lean on you for other things as well. And in terms of what you're coming up against, it might be a discussion that you guys need to have with the school and think about why you're coming up against those problems, what the issues are. Yeah?
Thank you.
Any other questions? And what I probably didn't mention, what I should tell you as well, is make sure you're working towards the same goals your teacher's working towards as well. I'm not sure what the status for that is, but when they can see that you're working towards the same things that they are, they find it easier to come to you and ask for help with ways that they can deliver the content as well. And I mean, you know your student really well, and they know the curriculum really well, so it can be a really team-focused environment in that way.
Yeah. Alrighty. Okay. I'd like to thank Carly again. If we can give her another round of applause.